everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name's 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐷𝐸.
And I'm Danny.
And this is our 65th episode.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in again for another episode. We always appreciate having you here. It's been a relatively uneventful few weeks here.
Yeah, it hasn't been too much to write home about. Honestly, I feel like we're getting used to the fact that we'll be hunkering in our bunker for the winter, except it also kind of feels like we've been doing that for quite some time.
Yeah, I'm definitely not looking forward to the winter this year. I don't really love the winter anyway. It's, winter in New England, it's really pretty at first and then it just drags on for like 8 months, it feels like. So not my personal favorite, but given the fact that all the stuff that we are able to do outdoors right now, presumably is going to be impossible to do in sub-zero temperatures. So, we're trying to think of solutions to that. Thank you guys so much for the feedback on the last episode, which was about type A personalities. I can't even count the number of people who were like, is it type A? Or is it anxiety? I can't tell, chicken and egg stuff. So I was really interested to hear other people say that, because I don't really think I've heard people talk about that. Anytime I hear people talk about type A people, it's always in this really aspirational way. And a lot of people seem to think that it was actually anxiety driving that. So interesting stuff, guys. Thank you.
If you're enjoying the podcast, if you've got something out of these past couple episodes, or if you're an avid listener and you've been tuning in for a while, feel free to leave us a review. It helps us reach more ears.
Yeah, podcasts are weird. You don't really know how many people are listening. It's just really weird. It's not like other forms of media where you can just click viewers and check out the demographics, like the info about who's listening and how long they're listening. It's really, really vague and sparse. So when people leave reviews, it lets us know hey, people are actually enjoying this. Or you can always send us a message personally as well, because we do always answer those, and it really does always make me smile when people send me those messages. So what are we talking about today, 𝐬𝐻𝐿?
Why diets fail? It seems to me like the word diet is synonymous with this thing that you just have to keep on doing. And then the other side is this is just how I live. But the truth, as usual, is somewhere in between. It's like you do have to have some periods of time where you're focused on changing your eating habits and how much you're eating. And there are other times where you can just maintain where you've gotten, and that is essentially your diet. I guess to my point here, it's diet shouldn't have to be this thing that you try and fail, and yet I think it is that way because we enter into changing our food habits and not realize that we're not doing what we need to do to make progress, essentially.
Yeah, so a lot of people I feel like are just stuck in this perpetual dieting cycle, or kind of they're just in a forever diet, but they're not actually making any progress towards what they're trying to, or they'll take one step forward and 2 steps back, and just over and over and over again. And it reminds me of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting different results. So when we're talking about diet today, we're talking about actually going on a diet, not just changing your diet or a lifestyle change. We're talking about going on a diet. And when you try to go on a diet and it just doesn't work, and the reasons why that might be the case. A lot of people really are trying. They have the best intentions, but it's just not working. They're not getting the results they want. And a lot of times it can just be because of a small little misstep that if you fix it, it will work. Sometimes it's bigger than that, but we wanted to get into what some of those things are.
The missteps are where I feel like it's sort of obvious, or at least it should be. But it's the bigger things that we go into. How do I word this? There are certain things that we need to be doing right that we just miss the mark on from day one, and we get hung up on the details when it comes to dieting. Honestly, a lot of it really just has to do, I feel, a lot of it has to do with basically committing to suffering somewhat without taking it to extremes. You have to acknowledge and accept the fact that you need to be eating less. And I think that we cheat ourselves out of being in a dieted phase because we like the idea of it, but when it comes time to put the work in, we just don't want to be hungry. So we wind up doing these things that we don't realize that basically prevent us from being in a caloric deficit.
Well, that's the bottom line right there, is that if you're dieting and you're not losing weight or body fat, the very, very, very simple answer is you're eating too much. And I know that statement pisses a lot of people off for a lot of reasons, but it's still a simple fact that if you're not losing, then you are eating too much. You are not in a caloric deficit.
Right.
So how can that be possible, right? How can it be possible that somebody is on a diet and they're not in a caloric deficit? So this is the real question, right? If we know you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight or lose body fat, or absolutely to lose weight, and you're not losing weight, then you are not in a deficit, right? Following me so far?
Mm-hmm.
What are the reasons that may be happening? I think there's a lot of them. Some of them are your fault. Some of them are not your fault, but that's still the basic premise.
And I think that the first thing to look at is probably going to be how the weekends look for you, because I honestly think that is where people fall off and they think that they can just make it up during the week.
Yes, that is a great point. People are in a caloric deficit. A lot of times they do a great job Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday they decide to loosen it up a little bit, but they're not loosening it up a little bit. They're loosening it up a lot. They are effectively closing their deficit completely in a 48-hour window. It's actually really easy to do. So you do have to be mindful on the weekends.
Yeah, exactly. I also think that it puts you in a place where you can wind up having frustrations about getting back on track, even just from a habit-based standpoint. And I also think that it sort of puts you in this mindset where you're creating more anxiety than you need to because of that behavior over the weekend. It feels out of control and it sort of feels good or blah, blah, blah. And then you turn around and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to get back on it. And I'm okay because I'm on it the whole time. As opposed to just trying to be a little more balanced and consistent with being in a caloric deficit. Or, hear me out, if you're going to eat more on the weekends, be accountable for it while you're also being mindful of how much you're eating on the weekends. In other words, it's not rocket science. It's not like you can eat more on the weekends when you're in a caloric deficit. You just have to make sure that your daily caloric average keeps you in a dieted down state. And that means like you take the average over 7 days, and that number that you come up with has to be an amount of calories that keeps you in a dieted state.
So to add on to that, if you are nailing it Monday through Friday, but then you're off on Saturday and Sunday and feeling like, it's just the weekend, the other 5 days I'm hitting it right on the head. If you're off for Saturday and Sunday, you're off 28% of the time. That's a lot. But on top of that, like Giacomo said about frustration and anxiety, when you do your next weigh-in or check-in or however it is you're checking your progress and you haven't made progress, a lot of times you feel like, well, why am I even bothering to try so hard Monday through Friday? Because in your mind, you're nailing it. You're kicking ass Monday through Friday. You're leaving 28% of your progress on the table. In your mind, you're killing it. So then when you don't make progress, you're like, well, why should I bother? Rather than actually looking at the fact that, like, are you nailing it? Because 2 days of the week being 500 or 600 calories over, that can close, depending on how big your deficit is, that could close it. And 500 or 600 calories over on the weekend is nothing. It's nothing. It's 2 drinks per day. It's one dessert, depending on the size of it. So, and that's, a lot of times people are eating well over 1,000 calories over on each day. 2,000 calories, that's 2/3 of a pound, that you just didn't make that progress because of the weekend. So one of the things that I do with my clients that are on a diet or in a fat loss phase is we implement deliberate, calculated refeeds. The weekends are higher calorie, but when you add it all up and average it out, like Giacomo was saying, it's still a deficit. And you're not just not paying attention on the weekends, you're just eating a little bit more strategically.
So yeah, I think that's the first thing to look at, is giving yourself that grace over the weekends while also being a little more than mindful, actually knowing what you're doing. It makes such a big difference, and I feel like you don't necessarily need that amount of control, but it definitely does help. And I think it just makes things happen a little bit faster, especially if you're the type where weight just doesn't just fly off you naturally.
Which is most people. Some people do lose weight really easily, but most people don't. And I think a lot of people are just miscalculating what they're eating, period. Like every day. They're missing the little BLTs, as we call them, the bites, licks, and tastes. Or, I was actually just talking to a client about this morning. A lot of times when people kind of eat off plan or eat over their plan, they don't log it at all because they can kind of pretend like if they didn't log it, it didn't happen, or like they don't want to face it themselves, so they just don't bother plugging it in. But there have been a lot of studies where they check to see how well people do with self-reporting their caloric intake. People are off. They are way off, actually. Even nutrition professionals in general, when self-reporting their nutritional intake, they're off by like 20% sometimes. 20%, that could be your entire deficit, the entire thing. So how does this happen? Well, in my experience, it happens over time. A lot of times I'll catch myself doing this towards the end of a prep. At the beginning of the prep, I'm weighing my soy milk that goes in my coffee. I'm like weighing my lettuce in a giant salad or something. And then as prep goes on, I'm like, I know how much soy milk goes in my coffee, and I just start eyeballing it. Or I have like more cups of coffee with soy milk in them through the day and I'm not plugging them all in, or I am just loading up on vegetables, which is definitely the least of all the concerns. But it still adds up. It all adds up. And if you're not accurately trying to track it, then you are almost definitely eating more than you think you are.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other thing to pivot from paying attention to our eating habits is I think it's important to also pay attention to what we're doing. And this is purely physiological. So, we have willpower and we have our smarts, and that's all well and good in our goals, but we are still in this human vessel, and our body is going to fight us tooth and nail in an instinctual, primal way. What I'm saying is we have this tendency to conserve energy when there's less food coming through. So when we start eating less, our body finds ways to be less active. And these kinds of ways, sometimes we can pick up on them. There are more obvious ones, and in other ways, we don't pick up on them. So in other words, I am a very squirrely kind of person.
You could say that.
I like to fidget. I'm constantly moving my body, even when I'm sitting still. I expend energy in ways that I am unaware of, and that is part of my metabolism. Now, within 3 days of dieting, all of those processes just start to slow down. They're automatic, and when they start to slow down, I don't even realize it.
I realize it because I can see you. And 𝐾𝐨𝐬, if you guys have never met him, he is always pinging off the walls. You're going to be 40 in 2 months, and he... I wish you guys could see the face he just gave me. Anyway, you're going to be 40 in 2 months, and I have seen you literally run circles around guys half your age. It's kind of crazy to me how you still have this much energy, but when you're... He's so mad at me right now. But when you're dieting, at all, you just slow down. You don't ping as much. You're not as excitable. But it's a natural response. This appears in so many different ways for people. It can literally mean you're talking with gesticulating your hands less. It can mean you just don't get up as often. There have been times when I'm deep into prep that I'm sitting on the couch or something and I have to pee. And I'm literally too tired to get up and bring myself to the bathroom to go pee. I convince myself it can wait. We can do it. Just wait until you have to get up to do blah, blah, blah. And that's your brain trying to conserve energy. Now, prep is a very extreme example, but the easiest way to mitigate this, what are you laughing? You look like you're laughing at me.
I just think of the games that we play with each other to joke about how our activity is slowing, and sometimes it's funny. And sometimes that other person is so dieted down, they just give you the look of death, and they're like, don't even think about it. For example, deep into a prep, Danny's putting all of her spices next to the area where she preps her food next to the stove, and I'm looking at her, I'm like, you know that you're moving less by having to remove one step from getting your spices and put them away. But he's like, shut up. You just want to be like a neat freak. And I'm like, okay.
Well, he is a neat freak, but
yes.
We also, our pantry is in the basement, which you will have seen if you've watched any of our YouTube videos. And I'll be like, 𝐶𝐿𝐵, we're out of soy milk in the fridge. Can you get more? And he'll just be like, sure, I'll just steal some of your neat. And I'm just like, damn it. And then I'll have to go get it. My body is much more clever about not moving. Much more clever. So the easiest way to make sure that you're not doing less, that you're not physically moving less, in my opinion, the easiest way to do it is track your steps. That's it. Just track your steps. So when you're not dieting, just figure out how many steps do you get a day on average. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be 4,000, 6,000, 12,000. It doesn't matter. But if you know how much you move when you're not dieting, you want to try and move that much while you are dieting, maybe even a little bit more, to make up for all of the other movements that you're just not doing, whether you realize it or not. I mean, you're going to turn over less in your sleep. Things you literally can't control. So you have to make up for it some other way. And walking is the easiest way to do it. And making sure you're paying attention to how much you're walking.
And it's funny, I am the first one to say constantly, hey, walking is the best thing for you because it doesn't cause fatigue and you don't burn muscle, so do it. Plus you get to move, right? So I'm selling this thing like it's a good thing, and in a lot of ways it is. You get out of your head, you are using energy, and it's not draining you per se. But the truth is, I do notice that when I get more steps in, while I'm not tired or more fatigued, I do notice that my body is expending more energy in general, and I start of like mutter under my breath, like, damn it, more steps. That means that I'm getting deeper into this, because again, there is some suffering involved in this, and it's just something you have to accept.
That's true. We could kind of talk about that, because a lot of times on this podcast, we talk about that it is stupid to suffer for the sake of suffering, which a lot of people feel like in order to get really lean or even to just like drop 10 pounds, you have to suffer like an extreme amount. And if you're not suffering, then you're not doing it right. That's not true. You can, suffer to a point where you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. You can diet so hard that you absolutely will gain it back. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's so many reasons why you shouldn't suffer unnecessarily. That said, if you are losing weight, you are gonna be hungry. That is the facts. There are little things you can do to try to delay this, to try and almost trick your body into the... I hate the term trick your body. You're not really tricking your body, but you can kind of trick your body into thinking that you're eating more by eating more voluminous foods instead of dense foods. But eventually, it catches on. You're gonna be hungry. And a lot of times when my clients check in, I always ask them, how are your hunger and fullness levels right now? If I'm considering changing something on their nutrition or what have you, how are your hunger and fullness levels right now? And sometimes people will say, I was pretty hungry this week. And if I look at everything and it makes sense and they're not suffering and their life is not suffering, then a lot of times I just let people know, if you're starting to feel hungry, it's starting to work. And, it can kind of sometimes be a dangerous thing to say, again, because a lot of people think, well, if a little hunger is good, then a lot of hunger must be better. It's not. And I never want somebody to take that sentence to the extreme, that they should always be hungry. But if their goal is to get smaller in some way, some hunger is going to be inevitable. And I think for me, it really helps to just make peace with that fact right out of the gate and don't try to fight it. Sometimes people can be like addicted to that feeling of hungry too. And sometimes people can be hungry for so long that then even just not being hungry just feels like you're stuffed, even though you're not stuffed. You're just not hungry anymore. So, these are all important things that you have to pay attention to. But making peace with being a little hungry during any kind of a fat loss phase, really, really important. Really a smart thing to do.
Right. And being a little more hungry than we'd like to be, while it's not how we typically live, I do feel like there's some value in it. I do feel like we tend to just not want to feel anything less than over full. I think because we have access to calorically dense, hyperpalatable food literally at the touch of a finger. We don't even have to leave our house. Someone will bring it to us. That it's easy to get accustomed to being overfull or craving the desire to be overfull. So I'm not saying to be starving. I'm just saying that dieting does teach us the discipline of being a little more hungry than we'd like to be. And obviously there's a rebalancing act after the diet where we can sort of live like that for at least some of the time.
And you can think of it like a spectrum almost. When you're kind of in maintenance or just living your normal life, you should feel hungry and full equally throughout the day, right? If you're in a building phase or a gaining phase, you're gonna feel full more often than you feel hungry. At the end, you might not feel very hungry at all. And then when you're dieting, you're gonna feel hungry more often than you feel full. And like at the end of prep, anybody who's ever gone through a bodybuilding prep knows you're never not hungry at the end because it's so extreme. That's why we don't just recommend it to people across the board. But even at the beginning of prep, you're hungry more often. Your meals keep you fuller for a shorter amount of time, and you just kind of make peace with that.
Right. The unfortunate part about the post-dieting phase is that your hunger signals don't catch up as fast as the rest of your body does. So you get to a place where your metabolism is where it needs to be. It's not dieted down, and you're not dieted down.
But you're still hungry.
And you're still hungry.
So let's talk about that, because that's kind of one of the things that we just mentioned. Let's go way back to the first one we said, like you're killing it Monday through Friday, but the weekends you're kind of losing your mind. And we talk about how, yes, you need to take some personal accountability for how are your weekends going. The other thing to take into consideration is your deficit just way too steep that it's not possible to adhere to it 24/7? Because that's also really common. As a lot of you guys know, if you go download MyFitnessPal and you're a woman and you tell MyFitnessPal that your goal is to lose weight, 90% of the time it's going to tell you to eat 1,200 calories. I can probably count on two hands over the course of over 1,000 athletes the number of women who I've needed to diet on 1,200 calories. Almost everybody, that's going to be way too low. Definitely way, way, way too low to start with. That's crazy. But if you're trying to, and let's say you have a lot of willpower, you like nail it, 1,200 Monday, 1,200 Tuesday, etc. through the week. By the time you get to the weekend, you're like literally starving, and it's not even about willpower anymore. Your body's just like trying to keep you alive, and then you eat a whole pizza and a half a gallon of ice cream, and then you feel like a failure when you're not a failure. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do, like 𝐾𝐨𝐽 just said. It's trying to regulate your metabolism. And if the deficit is too steep in the first place, you won't be able to maintain it and you won't make progress. So that to me sounds like the absolute worst case scenario of when a diet's not working. You're dieting so hard a good chunk of the time, and then you're binging really hard for a small portion of the time, and then you're not even making progress. Like, I can't think of anything worse than that. And we've all been there. Everybody has been there at one point or another, but it's brutal because you feel like you are being a rock star with your diet so often, and then you're just snapping, breaking, which is the only way that I can put it. This is not a deliberate choice, so I'm just gonna have a little pizza. This is like your brain breaks and you just start eating and you can't stop. And then the kicker, not only do you not make progress, a lot of times people gain weight. So you can be dieting and you could say, I'm dieting and I'm gaining weight. So it all comes back to like the bottom line of all of these scenarios. You're eating too much. You're eating too many calories. So the question is why and how do you fix it?
Right. And then there are some of those simple details that you could be missing, like how are you measuring your food? How are you tracking your food? I feel like a lot of times we say we're having certain portions and we're winding up cheating ourselves out of what we think we're adhering to because we're just measuring the food wrong. Like it's things as simple as like 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. Are you really having 2 tablespoons of peanut butter? And sometimes things as simple as a scoop of protein. Like is it a scoop and a half of protein that you're having? Because those little things that are seemingly harmless, even when they're not the calorically dense foods and they're the satiating foods, the calories can still add up and your body will find a way to outsmart you because it's hungry and it doesn't want you to use more energy than your body. It's assuming basically that it needs to conserve energy.
Yeah, and that comes back to the underreporting. Like, a lot of times people are underreporting, not even because they're just like, oh, I'm not going to log it, it didn't happen. You're right. They're just pulling out what they think is 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, and it's actually, if you were to weigh it, closer to 4. That's a 200 calorie difference right there. Other things that we've noticed in the past, like you said, protein powder, the serving will say 1 scoop, parentheses, 30 grams. And then you take the scoop that's in the jar and you pull it out, and then you weigh it and you're like, holy crap, this is like 44 grams in this scoop. You're like, it's not even close. And that's how they get you to buy their protein more often. Bread, 1 slice, parentheses, 28 grams. And you put it on the scale and it's like 45. And you're like, what the shit? Again, all of this stuff, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Like, you guys better believe I am not weighing bread when I'm not dieting, or weighing protein powder when I'm not dieting. And I don't want people to be doing that, because that's neurotic, and that's suffering for the sake of suffering, my friends, and it doesn't make sense. And if you're being consistent and eating the same 2 pieces of toast for breakfast every single morning, then you don't really have to weigh it. But if you are trying to lose weight, trying to lose body fat, and it is not working, you start looking at these things, because there could be a leak in your boat and you don't even know.
Honestly, I don't even necessarily like to start splitting hairs and looking at everything out the gate. I think some of this stuff you start to look at 2, 3, 4 weeks in, and it gives yourself a little bit of time and a little bit of leverage. In other words, maybe just by making these changes without looking at the details, you start dropping weight, and then things start to slow down, and the first knee-jerk reaction is, let's eat less. Mm-hmm. And you find a way to do that by eating less on the weekdays, or eating more on the weekends, or just eating less in general. Whatever the case is, the first thought in everyone's head, mostly, is how can I eat even less than I am now when the weight loss slows down? When it feels like the goalpost is moving further away.
So what you're saying is, people in their minds think, I need to eat less. They rework their plan so it's fewer calories on paper, but in actuality, it might not be, because they weren't actually eating what they thought they were eating in the first place. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that, and also they wind up cutting too hard, and that can also be a different issue. Like, in other words, like going off the rails, like cutting their calories in half, for example, instead of trying to take a look at what's going on and also eating less.
Yeah, there was a once upon a time, I think I've mentioned this before, once upon a time when I was a wee baby coach, and I was working with people, I would just cut their calories every week or every other week. But that was, if their goal was weight loss, whether they lost a pound or they didn't, if the goal was weight loss, we would just take their starting number and we would just hack it down over time. It worked. I mean, people got lean, but that was not the answer. And in hindsight, whew, boy, was that a bad move. It was a really bad move. I think that's important to be able to admit when, like, you as a coach have, like, messed up in the past. I mean, luckily these people still talk to me, go figure. But if I could go back, and this is an important takeaway, a little bit off topic, but I think you guys will follow. If you are making progress, don't mess with it. Don't mess with it. You don't need to mess with it. You don't need to mess with your macros. You don't need to mess with your training program. You don't need to mess with your cardio if you are making progress. Because that, I think, is a big mistake, and it's a mistake fueled by anxiety. That you need this to keep going. How can I get this to keep going? ///. And it's like that backfires on you big time. So a little bit off topic, but I still think it's an important thing to mention.
No, for sure. I feel like we can use anxiety to our advantage and also to our disadvantage. And this is one of those situations where perhaps we're doing more than we should because we're excited about making a change and seeing lasting change, right? And there are just certain tried and true things to look at and skills to have that work. So
there are some reasons that absolutely, totally are not your fault that your diet might not be working. And it still comes down to you're eating too much. But, why would 1,200 calories not be a deficit for somebody? Because there are some people where 1,200 calories isn't even a deficit. Why? Some people have medical conditions. I think it's a lot fewer than the media would like people to believe, but some people do have medical conditions where their metabolism is just that much slower. It could be a hormonal imbalance, they could be going through menopause, it could be PCOS, which I have myself. It could be all kinds of things that can slow down your metabolism. But this does not mean that it's impossible for somebody in those scenarios to be able to lose weight. You can. You absolutely can. I am living proof of that with polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis. I remember when they diagnosed me with PCOS at 16, I was 210 pounds. I had all the symptoms of PCOS that you can imagine. And they told me to basically eat a high protein, low carb diet. Now, I was already vegetarian at that point, and I ended up going vegan later that year. And when I did, they told me that that was ridiculous. That was literally the worst thing I could do for PCOS. Well, I lost 90 pounds over the next few years, and it was simply because it was very, very simple. It wasn't magic veganism that did this, even though I attribute veganism to a lot of improvements in my health. I was eating less food. I was eating less calories. I was eating more food physically, way more food on my plate, which was so cool to me. I didn't even understand what was happening at the time. But in retrospect, I was eating probably half the calories I was eating before. Boom, weight loss. That's what it takes. And unfortunately, we can't just plug ourselves into the wall and find out what our metabolism is. There are all these calorie trackers, and some of them are more accurate than others, but they're all wrong to some degree. It would be really cool, and I think someday we will be able to plug ourselves into the wall and find out how many calories we burn in a day, but we can't. So you have to play with it. You have to be willing to play with it. You have to realize that you can't just go to a calculator online and plug in some numbers and get the right numbers. You're different. You might not be that different from the median, but you might be.
Well, I think the other important thing to consider is just because it worked for you once or even twice doesn't mean it's going to work for you the third time.
YOLO. You're only lean once.
There it is.
There it is. If you diet super hard and you get really shredded and then you inevitably gain back the weight you lost and probably then some, and then you're like, well, I did this thing before. I'm just going to do this thing again because it worked last time. And then you try it again and it doesn't work as well. And then you rebound again and then you're I'm just going to try it again. And this time it doesn't work at all. That's really common. That is how dieting too hard can shoot you in the foot in the long term.
And too often.
Way too often. And that is how you end up dieting in a dieting cycle forever and not making progress.
The other point that I want to add to that is that age aside, our environmental stressors, our lifestyle, things change. And all of those things are important to take into account. I think we tend to treat ourselves as this perfect science experiment. And what science experiment is, there's only so many variables that you can control. So when your lifestyle changes, let's say you haven't dieted in 3 years and you go to diet again, you're like, all right, I had this formula, it worked. And you put that formula in again the same exact way, don't expect the same results. The body doesn't work like that.
No, when I worked in a restaurant and I was on my feet all the time, I'm talking one shift, 25,000 steps every day for years. Let me tell you how much more I could eat and lose body fat back then than I can now, where I have to force my ass outside to walk 10,000 steps every day. Because if I just sat at my desk and worked, I could easily have days under 3,000 steps all the time. Don't want that. So yeah, lifestyle changes are huge. The last time you dieted, did you have a kid? No, but now you do have a kid. You're probably burning things a little bit differently now. Are you 15 years older than you were the last time you tried something? Probably burning a bit differently now. So you're just a never-ending science experiment. And that's not a bad thing.
Honestly, I feel like that's the part of it that's the most fun. You get to literally observe what's going on each time you go into one of these phases where you're looking to change your body composition. It's your never-ending work of art, so to speak. I mean, that's how I view physique and physique-based goals.
Another reason that we didn't actually touch upon, but I think we should, even though most of our listeners probably already know this, we might have some new people. Hi, how are you? Welcome to our show. But one of the reasons why somebody's diet might not be working is, we've talked about they're eating more than they think they are, but that's assuming somebody's logging their calories or their food at all. A lot of people just decide, well, I'm just going to eat clean and then I'm going to lose weight. And a lot of people are wholly disappointed with that route.
Yeah, I honestly don't know how that is still a thing. But it is.
I totally get why it's still a thing. There's nothing wrong with, I hate the terminology eating clean because what the hell is clean? But I like the idea, eat lots of whole, unprocessed foods. Cool. It makes so much sense to people. You don't even have to explain it. Actually, there was a recent study on this. Clean eating, the idea of clean eating, still alive and well. Something like 72% of people are aware of clean eating and think it is a good thing. And it is a good thing. There's nothing bad about clean eating. It's just not inherently superior for weight loss.
I think it has advantages as long as you apply the principles of weight loss to clean eating.
Yes.
I think the inverse happens where we basically assume that clean eating is going to lead to weight loss, so we don't have to put the work in, and that's where I think things go awry.
Yeah, you could have a smoothie bowl full of whole fruits covered in oats and coconut and almonds. This smoothie bowl could be 1,200 calories in one bowl, and you could still technically be clean eating. I personally, the idea of baked sweet potatoes with almond butter and cinnamon on them, literally makes my mouth water. I could eat a giant plate of that, and I would certainly not be in a deficit if I were to eat just eating whole foods that I love. I think this is a great thing for people who have no idea about nutrition. They've never tried to take their nutrition into their own hands before. I think it can be a great way for people to learn to love whole foods, because I think people need to learn how to love whole foods. But it has a limit. Many people, just by switching from a standard American diet to a quote-unquote clean eating diet, they are going to be eating fewer calories and they will lose weight, and they'll think, wow, clean eating, magical. And then they discover dates stuffed with peanut butter and jars of roasted mixed nuts.
It's all over.
And then they're like, wow, this isn't working as well as it worked before. Because now they're eating, yes, whole foods, clean foods by a lot of people's definition, but now they're in a caloric surplus. A lot of people go vegan and gain weight. I read about it every day. I went vegan 6 months ago, and I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, but I'm gaining weight. Listen, I love veganism. I wish the world would go vegan, but there's nothing, especially in 2020 with all the vegan foods we have now. It's not veganism that's going to make you lose weight. It's a caloric deficit, which could be made easier by veganism because you're eating so much more volume and so much more fiber if you are including whole foods, but you may still not be in a deficit.
Yeah, and we wind up placing this sort of unrealistic attachment to veganism or clean eating, and we start to become emotional about it. And on top of that all, the worst part about it is we wind up reaching out to others without giving enough context because we don't understand what we're doing, and then we start to blame ourselves. And then you wind up being the person who feels like a failure all the time when really there were just some things that you could have been doing differently while also embracing veganism and clean eating and checking in with yourself to make sure that you were learning and that your goals were being reached.
There's a lot of pieces that need to be in place to have a successful diet. Some people get it right off the bat and they figure out something that works really well for them and it's sustainable. But I would say those people are in the minority. Most people are just kind of beating their head against a wall for years, sometimes decades, trying to find something that works for them and feeling like there must just be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with my body. Why does this work so well for everybody else? It doesn't work so well for me. And a lot of times it's because we just don't learn these fundamentals. They don't teach us this in school. So, we learn about nutrition from magazine covers that are just trying to get you to buy their magazine, or, the loudest coach in the room who's just saying something flashy and exciting. It's actually, it's all about these basics and really having a pretty good understanding of them in order to be successful. It's possible. It's totally possible. It's totally doable. You just may need to take a harder look at what you're doing.
Pretty much.
All right, moving on to our question and answer segment. Oh God, reading Giacomo's handwriting. Here we go. This one's for you, Giacomo. Giacomo is what our niece calls Giacomo.
And there's a little more of a Giacomo.
Giacomo? Okay, this question is for Giacomo. I'm starting a graveyard job and a bit confused on how to track my macros. Should I eat at night into the morning? What do you think? I still can't read it.
Would be best.
What do you think would be best?
Well, I think what is going to be optimal is going to depend on whatever your habits already are. Well, actually, you said you're starting a graveyard shift, so this is going to be different, right? Well, I definitely wouldn't recommend not eating because you're working a graveyard shift during your shift, because that would be a recipe for disaster. I feel like there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be counterintuitive for you because your schedule is changing so darn much. So honestly, if it was me, I would give myself a little bit of time to adjust and know what it would feel like to work that shift, like 2 to 4 weeks. And then I can see like when I'm hungry, when I'm sleeping, etc., etc. So that's what I would do. Step 1, give yourself 2 to 4 weeks to adjust to this change in schedule. Step 2, while you're adjusting, please eat. Like eat while you're working. Like at least have, I guess, what do you call it, lunch? 4 a.m. lunch or whatever, what have you. I would treat my work shift like I would treat my work shift during the day. On my lunch break, I would eat lunch. And on a work break or 2, I would plan myself a snack. And then I would have something after I woke up when I got home, provided that I would sleep after I got home. I feel like that's how I would run that. Go home, sleep, wake up, have breakfast, and maybe have lunch before I start, and then have dinner on a lunch break during my graveyard shift, and maybe have a snack during my graveyard shift. I mean, it could be a little weird eating that late at night, perhaps, but I think it would be even more weird to not eat while you also needed energy to work. You have anything to add to that?
I would just say that I would follow the same macros in a 24-hour period. Just maybe instead of your 24-hour period starting with like waking up at 8 a.m. and going to bed at midnight, your 24-hour period is like you wake up at 2 p.m. and go to bed at 6 a.m. or something like that. So 24 hours is still 24 hours. I think the annoying thing would just be like if you're tracking it in an app or something, it's going to start a new day at midnight. But that, I mean, really that doesn't matter. Honestly, you could just go back a day, or you could just, let that be that 24-hour period.
This next one's for you, Danny. As a beginner, how long do you cycle your cutting and bulking cycles for?
So as a beginner, I wouldn't really be cycling bulking and cutting personally. The question for a lot of beginners is where they should start. Should they start trying to build, or should they start trying to cut? And I think what you should probably ask yourself is, what do you want to do in the beginning? Are you like a real skinny 19-year-old who wants to bulk up? Okay, then start in a caloric surplus. Do you have 50 pounds that you want to lose? Okay, then you should start in a caloric deficit. If you're pretty happy with your weight in general, where I suggest most people start is just at a maintenance phase. If you're a beginner, just getting used to eating at your caloric maintenance with appropriate macros, like eating enough protein, consistently hitting your calories every day, because obviously you've been maintaining your weight for this long, so on average you're hitting the right calories to maintain that weight every day. But maybe one day you're eating 1,000 calories and the next day you're eating 2,500. Getting used to eating consistently across the board can be a brand new thing for a lot of people. And that alone, paired with a really good lifting protocol, can get you really, really good results in the first year. Unless you have a lot of weight to lose, I don't really like people starting with a cutting cycle. Just speaking from my own personal experience, if I could go back in time and do things differently, I would have stopped trying to cut much sooner than I did. I would have just tried to eat at maintenance and build muscle. And I think to this day, I would be a better bodybuilder if I had done that. But I did have a lot of weight to lose at first. I lost it. And then I just kept going. I just kept dieting. And that was a huge mistake. So I think once you're at what you feel is a healthy weight, just eat at maintenance and learn to build consistency for like a year before you decide to pick a direction. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. If you have any questions or comments or topics you would like us to cover, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram at Vegan Proteins and at Muscles by Brussels, or on YouTube. We really look forward to getting those comments. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Danny.
And I'm Giacomo.
And we will talk to you soon.
Take a